I do want to transition to the role of strength and mobility.
Yeah.
Just because from my understanding, right, there's obviously like static strength. Let's say if you're, lifting a dumbbell or a barbell, like, that's just one specific movement versus like if you're doing like full kettlebell bell motion, right, that's more of like a dynamic, fluid kind of strength. So talk to me a little bit about the role of strength, like say strength training and also mobility training when it comes to physical therapy.
Strength. I mean, it's just work equals force times distance. So if you can move a certain weight or your own body weight over a certain distance, you're getting stronger. And then when it comes to mobility, just to give people definition, flexibility is just how far a certain joint can go, how far a certain muscle can be stretched, versus mobility is combining flexibility and strength together, which is you need to be able to be strong within that range of motion. So Mike might be able to lift his arm overhead like this, but can he actually keep his arm overhead up there with a kettlebell, with a 15-pound kettlebell in his hand, right? That's the determination of he can flexibility wise get up there, but can he sustain that position? Because you have good endurance and stability in that position so that he can prevent injury from occurring. So that's like strength and mobility. And I would say rehabilitation plan wise, people usually start off with just easy weights to like isolate certain muscles. So like if it's like a bicep curl, just to strengthen, specifically isolate the bicep. But bicep curl doesn't necessarily lead to, I don't know, picking your child off the floor, because that requires squat, then bend your elbows, then stand up from that. So it's a little bit more dynamic. And that's where when people's usual rehab program goes from like gentle stretches, get the body moving, especially for a novice, do some easy strength exercises to get their confidence up and to build strength in certain areas without risk of injury. Then afterwards, build in the function, right? So now we're actually mimicking picking up your child off the floor, or we're mimicking swinging your golf club, right? Those are some of the more functional strength things that you were talking about. Like, yeah, kettlebell is more dynamic, more fluid, more multi-directional, but sometimes you need to stay in one plane first, then kind of transition out of that. So strength and mobility, hopefully that gives people a sense of, mobility is not the same as flexibility, and then strength is like strength and flexibility kind of marinate into mobility.
Got it. Is there like I'm just still curious about the strength aspect. Like, okay, when would you tell your client like, hey, we really need to focus on strength versus we need to focus on mobility, and like what are the use cases for that in terms of addressing, I would say, like whatever you deem as the common, chronic or acute issues that you see. Like, how do you separate those out, and then eventually, I'm assuming, combine those, later on.
Yeah, sometimes I think most people associate tightness that they feel or tension that they feel with a muscle or a joint being tight, but that's not always the case. So a lot of my clients, I will actually start them immediately on some form of strength exercise. So it's not always like, oh, get things moving, just stretch certain things, then transition to strength. Oftentimes it will, for me at least, I'm biased, but it will always be a mixture of strength and mobility right from the get-go. And sometimes I put them on a scale of 1 to 10. So 10 being they're hypermobile, they're very, very flexible already, but maybe they lack stability and they need to work on more so biasing towards strength. Then maybe you look at like a really big retired football player who has lost some strength, but they're just really stiff. They're a 300-pound dude, they're really stiff. So they need to bias themselves more towards mobility and flexibility. But you make that assessment based on the movement that you see. So when I see somebody move, I can tell where the restrictions lie. I can tell where they're lacking strength. You take them through certain tests to determine where on that scale that they need to bias themselves towards. So for me, like the tightness, it's a myth to think that everybody that's tight, they need to get stretched out. You oftentimes will strengthen that area right away, and you'll see how that like relaxes the musculature or it resets the nervous system. And it's funny how the statistics show that physical therapists only, I think 56% of physical therapists actually strength train or actually provide strength training, and I think that's preposterous. I think that most people should think strength is oftentimes the way to go, and mobility again is the mixture of strength and flexibility. So if you get people more mobile, they can get results pretty quickly.
Got it. I think that makes sense. I think I noticed that before I started bouldering, and I've only been bouldering for maybe about almost a year or so, I would get more tired out, right? Just from certain types of activities. So let's say, for example, if I'm playing a pickup basketball game, right, and I wasn't bouldering before, my whole entire body would be really tired. But now that, like, I've recently picked up playing basketball again, after, let's say, a year of rock climbing or bouldering, I'm like, hey, I don't feel as tired anymore, right? Like, it's not the recovery period, it's not as rough, right? Because my body's already, has gotten used to it. So I can definitely like see the benefits of strength plus mobility in
Hmm.
terms of uh, just overall, just building up or just having less fatigue,
Hmm.
right? Just for everyday kind of life and just giving you more energy. So that is like a benefit that I've definitely seen from doing
For
more
sure.
strength oriented stuff.
Yeah.
Is more energy, like, in your daily life.
And capacity is just your ability to, like, you have your shoulder or your hips or your body is like an 8 ounce glass, right? So filling up that 8 ounce glass, beyond the 8 ounce glass, you try to put 12 ounces in an 8 ounce glass, you're going to overfill it, aka that results in a mess, results in an injury, results in a strain of a muscle. But if you strength train, which most people need to strength train more nowadays because we're all stuck at home, if you strength train, you build that capacity. So now you have a 16 ounce glass, which is your shoulder. Now, if you try to fill up 12 ounces, you're not as tired. You're at less risk for injury. You can recover much faster because you haven't even exceeded that capacity. So hopefully that gives people a good analogy of why they should strength train or why they should get more mobile.
Makes sense. I have a question about maybe a smaller case where, let's say, someone is super eager, right, to do all of like the exercises to strength train, and say they're doing it every single day, right? And maybe they're pushing themselves a little too hard. Talk to me about maybe the role of rest and recovery in terms of physical therapy, just because I know we've talked a lot about strength and mobility, but rest also as an important component of the recovery period.
There's a there's a big vast difference between absolute rest and relative rest. Absolute rest is you've been training yourself, you go cold turkey and you just sit on the couch and you don't do anything. And relative rest is if I made you, Mike, a 4 day split of strength training and your nervous system is getting kind of tired and fatigued from doing it for 3 weeks straight, then we relatively rest where we cut down the intensity and the volume. So cut down the sets, repetitions, the weight by, let's say, half. You're still mimicking the same movements, but we're giving your nervous system and your body a chance to recover from that. And so that's one aspect. It's like that's relative rest. You're still doing things so that you're not just getting weaker or stiffer during the week. Let's say it's called a deload week, but you are doing something that will still say, hey, my nervous system gets a chance to recover. But when I get back into the sport or the activity that I want to do, I'm still mimicking those same patterns, but now I'm more refreshed. Okay. So mobility, and then also there's just so many aspects of recovery that we could talk about, like sleep, stress
Sure, sure.
management, eating the right foods, but that's probably for another time.
Got it. So it sounds like rest and recovery, I mean, it's important, but it's also just there's a lot of factors and components that go into it.
For sure.
I know for me, for bouldering, I try to boulder maybe every other day, just because it's, higher intensity one day.
Hmm.
The next day, it's maybe I'll go for a walk or something like that. I'll still, obviously maintain exercise,
Hmm.
but knowing that I have that day to rest, I guess, relatively speaking,
Hmm.
um, I feel like it's really important, and obviously sleep, like trying to get 8 hours of sleep as well, also super important.
Yep.
But yeah, just for me at least, alternating every other day, or having maybe 1 to 2 days in between more physical straining activity has really been helpful, because I have noticed when I've tried to do stuff like 2 days in a row, it's like, oh, the moment I try it on the second day, I'll feel good for maybe 15-30 minutes, but then the fatigue immediately kicks in, and I just want to make sure that I don't potentially injure myself from
Hmm.
going too hard, right?
Yep.
And I'm sure maybe that's something that you see with your clients as well, where for the ones who are more active, you want to make sure that they don't overdo it.
There's a sense of just people either overtrain or they under recover, right? So it's kind of like a conundrum. So are they truly overtraining, or are they just not getting enough sleep or eating enough protein after their strength workout, right? Or if they are truly overtraining, it's that comes in the form of like frequency, or they're lifting the same amount of weight way too many times. But can they recover better? So are they doing enough stretching and mobility right after their workout, or are they getting enough sleep? Are they eating enough, right? Because some people, classically, people are trying to get stronger, but they're also trying to lose weight at the same time, and it just it doesn't coincide with each other. You need to supply your body with the right fuel, the proper sleep, manage your stress at work, move at work as well, because if you don't move at work, then you're a weekend warrior, and then you just get hurt on the weekend. That's classic.
Right.
But yeah, the overtraining and under recovering conundrum is still something that is left to be said. It's still a controversy amongst like many of the fitness professionals. Like people are like, oh yeah, you can't overtrain. You can only under recover. Like I think you could do both, right? You do 1,000 bicep curls, your bicep will fall
Right.
off.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like I've seen people where like they just like weight train or they just like, work on one specific thing, but then like they'll like for example, a classic one is like they'll do ton of bicep curls, but then they can't do the whole like, put your arms behind your back, right? And
Yeah.
try to link, your hands together because you just don't have that flexibility. And it's like I would imagine with strength training, you're potentially like you were saying, like a football player, you're stiffening up, right? Certain types of muscles without the flexibility.
Mm-hmm.
So I can see how you do need that balance a little bit.
Definitely, for sure.
Cool. I do want to talk about how physical therapy kind of differs with age. So, let's say, if you're a kid playing sports, like, you got into kind of, you were interested in physical therapy like pretty early on, like when you were in middle school and stuff like that. And then, once you're kind of past that into like high school, college, young adult, becoming a parent, then becoming a grandparent, I'm sure physical therapy means something different, at every stage of life. So, kind of talk to me about how it differs for different people at different stages of life.
I think for kids and adolescents they can't stick to structure, right? And I don't treat a lot of kids anymore. I did when I was working in corporate setting, but you have an adolescent or a kid, sometimes they can't tolerate structure, so it's really just about making the exercise fun, right? Then maybe
Right.
they're getting into like organized sports and they really want to excel at what they do, or let's say their dad or their mom is like pressuring them to do it. So yeah, you start to get them into more organized things. They have more interest in it, and they maybe don't have a deep sense of why, but it's more so just about the performance aspect. I just want to be stronger and faster than my peers. Then you get into life where it's like, hey, maybe it's college, or maybe it's like adulthood where their mom or dad, and now things start to change meaning, right? They might have a lot of to dos, they might have a lot of priorities. Maybe their work is like, they're really just trying to make money, at that point in the early stages of 20s and 30s. So now they're not prioritizing their health. So now it's like, hey, how do you get that person to comply with building in better habits? Because it used to be all about fun, but now it's about, oh, now I need to exercise because I will die early if I don't,
Right.
right? And then also now you're older, depending on like whether you're older and you have good habits, you're older and you have like not the best optimal habits. But now it's just about enjoying that quality of life. So where do you want to be in retirement? How do you want to feel? And so that transition may be not lifting heavy weights, but just getting onto a program that you enjoy doing and that you can sustain long term. So I think I guess it's a loaded question in a sense that it's so multidimensional. There's so many different personas and characteristics out there that you can't just pigeonhole all adolescents need this, all adults need this, all older adults need this. But you can kind of say, well, older adults will only live another 20, 30 years. So it's all about preserving their quality of life and giving more meaning to the exercises that they're doing.
I mean, I think you answered the question quite perfectly in my honest opinion. Like you talked about how generally speaking, from what you've seen in your experience, what those kind of aspirations are, right, for each of those different age groups. And we all have different aspirations,
Mm-hmm.
as we grow older, whether it's just to have fun, right? Maybe it's more, hey, now we start to care about our health or even performance. And I think we slowly start to shift over from having fun to like maintenance. Like, how do I make sure that, like, if you're having becoming a parent or something like that, like you have like an ever increasingly heavier baby, right?
Mm-hmm.
Or child that you're going to have to carry, and maybe that's where weight training, and mobility and flexibility come more into play, because you didn't have to necessarily worry about that when you didn't have a kid.
Mm-hmm.
And like when you're a grandparent, right, like maybe it's just about, I want to be able to touch my toes, and I want to make sure that, and that, the funny thing about that is that I think you might know him, Eric. Eric
I think
Chan,
so, yeah.
because also I think he's a
Hmm.
PT. He was telling me about how his clients, because he worked with a lot of older
Hmm.
people. He was saying they were just happy to say to like one another, "Hey, I'm able to touch my toes. Can you touch your toes?" Right? Like flexibility was like wealth, like
Yeah.
to them, and just to be able to do those very simple things that they had in their youth or when they were younger, and to be able, like you said, to preserve that was something that where that aspiration changes
Hmm.
kind of over time.
Yep. Everyone has different milestones. Everyone has different goals and aspirations. So a good physical therapist should always link every exercise that they give to their client a sense of this is leading you towards your goal. This is leading you towards what you said to me on the first session. I think that's very, very important because too many times I think healthcare will drift their own directions, or they'll just start to pigeonhole everyone into saying, "Hey, you have neck pain, you get XYZ exercise." Instead, like really pinpoint it towards if Mike, grandpa wants to run, then you're not just giving them lying down exercises because lying down has nothing to do with running. But you actually have to be like, okay, well, let's see how you jog, right? Let's actually just get your running shoes on. Let's see how you jog right now. And I think that puts way more purpose and compliance towards their plan of care. And like you said, everybody is so multidimensional and the characteristics vary. So always leading back to their sense of why and their characteristics and what their goals are makes the most difference long term.
Got it. I know we've talked about a ton of different exercises, the role of strength, the mobility, and flexibility. Talk to me a little bit how you work with personal trainers, right? Like maybe there are clients that have personal trainers and maybe they get injured, they come and see you, right? Like, what is that dynamic between a physical therapist and a personal trainer in terms of like trying to make sure that they are on the right path? Just because you guys focus on different things, you're more on like the pain prevent. I mean, there's overlapping and differences, right, between a
Mm-hmm.
personal trainer and a physical therapist, but just focus on different things. So I'm just curious, how you work with personal trainers.
It's still at the end of the day what I call like a rehab training continuum. So rehab and training, people think they're mutually exclusive items, but rehab is just a lower intensity form of training. So if you got hurt in basketball, Mike, maybe your
Yeah.
rehab involves you're still squatting because that's really pertinent to the sport, but maybe it's not like multi-directional lateral movement and hopping yet, right? But it's leading you directly to that goal. It's just less intense. It's less intense because your tissue right now is undergoing a certain stress, and maybe there's a certain tissue is damaged and needs time and healing and strength and mobility. So the continuum there is, I work with a lot of personal trainers. I've done a lot of personal training um, seminars where I teach the personal trainers how to prevent injuries and how to look at the knee and the shoulder in a different way. So personal trainers often will, if they know me personally, they will send me their client because their client is injured and they're not sure how to diagnose that specific injury. Send them to me, get them to a point because at a certain point they've lost some capacity after they've experienced an injury. But the point of where I'm at is like I want to build on that capacity, empower them to work out again and get back to the activities that they'd like to do. And then once that happens, then I can transition them back to saying, hey, now you need to continue this long term. You can either do it by yourself, or what I would suggest is maybe go back to your personal trainer so that way they can keep you accountable. And that's where the accountability piece comes into play. But I like that dynamic between personal training because I used to be a personal trainer. I did a lot of free personal training back when I was at Davis. But now it's like that continuum of you've lost some capacity, so let's build up that capacity in the form of rehab, and then let's go ahead and build you back up to where you are, and then go ahead and now transition back to personal training.
Got it. Like, how closely do you work with their personal trainers, right? Like, if they do have a personal trainer, are you like, hey, this is the rehab plan that I'm putting them on. This is how well they've completed it. And okay, I know that they're going to continue to go back to personal train, to you as a personal trainer. Uh, Here are the things to kind of XYZ to look out for. Do you continue to follow up once they've, let's say they've gone back to the personal trainer and see like, hey, are they actually progressing? Is there any flare ups? Like, talk to me about that relationship that you have with maybe your clients' personal trainers, or let's say if your clients don't have a personal trainer, right? Is that something where you have a network of personal trainers that's fit for their specific physical level or the type of injury that you want to make sure that they don't re-injure again by basically providing them an accountability partner.
Cool. It sounds like almost like a two-part question. So I would say it is a disservice as a physical therapist to not communicate with the personal trainer and say, hey, if they're seeing me, but they're seeing the personal trainer at the same time, what that personal trainer needs to abide by. And they get governed by law. And I say, like, I know their injury. You might know that they have knee pain, but I know exactly what's going on because I've assessed their joint mobility and everything. So I'll tell them exactly what they need to do if they're still continuing with them. But if that personal trainer, if I feel like they're not being compliant with what I'm saying, or they're experiencing flare-ups after going personal training, I will tell the client, like, for sure, like, hey, you need to actually stop going to this for now and just abide by my plan because we're adding in too many confounding variables that are preventing you from moving forward. Once they're at a point where they're experiencing less pain, they're slowly getting back, they're like 75% on the way there, you can then say, hey, it's up to you what you want to do. If they're a person that can't afford personal training, just say, hey, these are the XYZ things you need to do long term, so you don't need to see me again. But if it's like, hey, now you're transitioning back to the personal trainer you were going to, then I communicate with the personal trainer, hey, I'm about to discharge this person. This is what they need to do. We've been focusing on XYZ, and you need to continue to build on these things. And if you don't know how to build on these things, I will give you examples on how to build on these things. So I think the interpersonal relationship between client, physical therapist, and personal trainer, we all need to be in alignment together, because if one person's out of alignment, whether it's the client that's being non-compliant or it's the personal trainer that's not abiding by the plan that we set forth, then it really doesn't work. It becomes a mess of things. So if that makes sense on how I answered that question, it's a very, I wouldn't say it's an intricate, it's a pretty simple dynamic as long as everybody's on the same page.
Got it. Yeah, I was just curious about that question or that topic because we have a lot of mutual personal trainer friends, and I'm just interested in that specific dynamic because you guys are both doing different types of activities that are maybe similar. So I was just curious, like, how you guys all work together and if there was a specific dynamic, because most of the time it's just like see a physical trainer, see a physical trainer, or see a physical therapist, right? And so some people might not even know the difference, like unless you're actually like saying, hey, I want to work out, right? They might think like, oh, do I need to see a physical therapist, right? Or do I need to see a personal trainer? And so I just wanted to kind of like separate those out a little bit, but also ask about how they are related to each other.
A quick disclaimer about that is I know personal trainers that know biomechanics better than a physical therapist. And I also know,
Cool.
And so you got to trust. I mean, that's where networking comes into play, where the personal trainer personally and say, hey, I can trust you with a specific client. Because, and that's the golden question. It's like when people are injured, should they go to a personal trainer? I would say my bias more so should always be like, either go to your MD or go to see a physical therapist directly, because you have direct access to see us. But I think that if you're just trying to shape up, if you have some minor ailments, I would say most of the time that can be solved with like personal training. But there are great personal trainers that have done just so many courses, they know about biomechanics and everything, and they address many aspects of wellness like I do. That I could say, hey, maybe it's just personal training that is what you need. But there's always that sense of like, oh, you have the doctor of physical therapy. There's that title that says, oh yeah, go to them because they will get me more physically in shape.